Hi friends, my name is Andrew Book. I'm the Director of Congregational Excellence for the James River District of the United Methodist Church here in Virginia. And I want to take a little bit of time today to talk to you about some of the ongoing discussions that we're having within the United Methodist Church as a whole around human sexuality. Human sexuality is a hot button issue in a lot of areas as we try to figure out personally, as a group, how do we understand this gift that God has given us of sexuality, especially in light of a world where understandings of sexuality are constantly changing. I put the Great Commission here on the easel board next to me, and I want this to be here and kind of be shaping our thoughts as we talk about this, because whatever it is we're thinking about, it comes in this context of these words from Jesus. He's called us to go and make disciples of all nations. And we see within the United Methodist Church people trying to make disciples in a lot of different ways. And we don't always agree on what it means to make disciples. But my hope for you is that regardless of where you're at in your own understanding of human sexuality, that you would be pursuing making disciples, that you would be helping people to follow Jesus. And you'd be remembering this. Jesus has promised us that He's with us always. And so, no matter what happens within the conversations in your church, within the conversations in the church as a whole, Jesus is with us. And that is a beautiful, beautiful thing on which to rely. All right, within the United Methodist Church, we have people all over the place. And I mean that both geographically as well as in our positions on human sexuality. The United Methodist Church is a global denomination. That means that we might have churches here in Virginia as well as in the west coast of the United States, but we also have churches in Europe, throughout Africa, in the Philippines, in all sorts of different places where people are trying to figure out how do we make disciples, how do we live as disciples in our different contexts. Now, the result of that is that United Methodism looks different in a lot of different places. We've tried to figure out how do we live as one church, as one denomination. And we have a group called our General Conference, which meets every 4 years, in order to figure out what does it mean to be a United Methodist. Over the years, our General Conference has developed what's called our Book of Discipline. This is the most recent version from 2016. And our Book of Discipline lays out what it means to be United Methodist, or at least that's the goal. Let me read to you some of what the Book of Discipline says about human sexuality. The practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. Therefore, self-avowed practicing homosexuals are not to be certified as candidates, ordained as ministers, or appointed to serve in the United Methodist Church. A few sections later it says this: ceremonies that celebrate homosexual unions shall not be conducted by our ministers and shall not be conducted in our churches. Now, how do those words strike you? For those of you who are more traditional, you probably hear that and think, that's right. That's what Scripture teaches. That's what it meant in Genesis when God created man and woman for one another. That's what Jesus meant when He reaffirmed the creation story as the model for marriage. That marriage is to be between one man and one woman. And that's what traditionalists within the United Methodist Church think. They hear those words as an affirmation of what they understand Scripture to teach. Now, some of you, I imagine, are seeing red at hearing those words. It's making your ears turn red, you got steam coming, and it's just making you angry because you don't view that as God's desire for the church today. When you read Scripture, you see Scripture as bending towards including those who are outcast. You might read stories like the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts 17 and say, that man would have been excluded in the Old Testament because he was a eunuch. But now he's invited into the church, and that's what we need to do. We need to invite in those who have been excluded. And that's what progressives in the church think. And so we have a situation where the traditional view is what is in our official book, our Book of Discipline. But there are many parts of the United Methodist Church where progressives hold sway. And in those areas, the things prohibited here, ordaining, gay and lesbian clergies, having marriage ceremonies for same-sex couples. Those things happen in parts of the United Methodist Church. When traditionalists see that happening, they start seeing red. Because they say, you're not following our book that we've agreed on. You're not following the covenant that we've committed to in the book of discipline. But progressives see it as a matter of justice, a matter of inclusion and following the law of love that Jesus set out. And they say, you know what? No matter what it says in our book of discipline, we need to be people who embrace the world. And so you can see how this becomes a very tense issue, and one that we have to figure out how to resolve for us to be a church together today. Now, I mentioned the General Conference is the group that gives us our official policies as the United Methodist Church. In 2016, which was the last time General Conference met, they asked the bishops to create a way forward for us. And in response, the bishops did two things. They gathered a group called the Commission on a Way Forward to study and create some possibilities for us to change our positions in order to work as a worldwide church with different views. They also called for a special session of General Conference to happen in February of 2019. Now, over the last few years, the Commission on a Way Forward has been working hard to create what they see as some proposals that might change how we do life as a church, that we can try to live together. There are three proposals that have been put forward through the plans of the Commission on the Way Forward, and I want to share those with you briefly as we think about what might happen in February of 2019 as General Conference gets back together. The first of those three plans is what's called the One Church Plan. The One Church Plan is the plan that the majority of the bishops have supported. It's the plan that comes with the most support from the Commission itself. But ultimately, General Conference will be the one who votes to either approve or deny that plan or any other plan. The One Church Plan is a contextual plan where they say that each annual conference, through what's called their Board of Ordained Ministry, will have the choice to either ordain or not to ordain gay and lesbian individuals. It will remove the prohibitions that are in our Book of Discipline currently and allow the conferences to make that choice through either their Board of Ordained Ministry or through their clergy session of the annual conference. Each church will then have an opportunity to say, we want to celebrate same-sex marriages in our sanctuaries, or not. Each clergy person will have the opportunity to say, I want to officiate over same-sex marriages, or not. Each congregation will also be given the opportunity to say to their bishop, yes, we would like to be considered to have a pastor who is in a same-sex relationship, or no, we don't think that that's something that we can do. And so the goal of the One Church Plan is to allow for some contextualization for each church and each annual conference to say, this is what we think is happening in our setting. The second plan that is being put forward through the Commission on the Way Forward is a plan called the Connectional Conference Plan. Now, the Connectional Conference Plan is a bit of a restructuring plan. And so what it does is it takes the structure we currently have and shuffles it a bit. Right now we have the General Church, which is all of the United Methodist Church. And then within the United States, we have what are called jurisdictional conferences. These are basically regional conferences. For Virginia, we are part of the Southeastern Jurisdictional Conference. There's 5 of those in the U.S. And the Connectional Conference Plan would remove jurisdictional conferences and replace them with 3 connectional conferences, which would be based on theological position and view towards acceptance of LGBTQ pastors and the practice of marriage within churches. So you would have a traditional conference in which LGBTQ persons are not ordained and weddings are not celebrated. You would have a progressive conference in which the LGBTQ individuals could be ordained and gay and lesbian marriages would be celebrated. And then you would have a middle conference which would be more like the One Church Plan, where some churches would approve of those wedding celebrations and accept LGBTQ pastors, and others would not. So there would be 3 different conferences which an annual conference, like Virginia Annual Conference, could choose to align with. And if any church within Virginia didn't like the direction that the annual conference as a whole opted to go, that church could then move to another conference and affiliate with the connectional conference that best lines up with their own views. That plan is going to require what's called constitutional amendments, and that means that there are parts of the Book of Discipline, parts of the way we've organized ourselves as a church, which we say, this is our constitution. We don't really think it should be changed unless everybody agrees. And so to change the Constitution requires a higher percentage of vote at General Conference, and then it requires 2/3 votes of all the people in the annual conferences to vote as well. So there's a bit of a higher bar for the Connectional Conference plan to clear if it wants to pass. Now, the third plan that's included in this report is one that wasn't actually developed by the Commission, but it was included at the request of some of the bishops. And it's what's called the Traditional Plan. The Traditional Plan keeps our current language about the incompatibility of homosexuality with Christian practice. Furthermore, it includes some more language about accountability. It includes additional structures that would allow the church to enforce the position of not including homosexuals in the life of the church a little more than it currently allows. Traditionalists are kind of frustrated with our current structure because they say, this is our policy, but we don't have the means to enforce our policy. And so the Traditional Plan would create those means. Now, in addition to that, the Traditional Plan creates a disaffiliation process that would allow churches that say, you know what, we're not willing to be a part of this traditional United Methodist Church. We need to step aside. It creates a plan that allows churches to do that by paying their fair share of some of our unfunded liabilities. Those are specifically some of our pension plans that aren't fully funded. And for more information on that, you can check out the plan. I'll give you a link to that in just a few minutes. It allows for the creation of Methodist denominations that are affiliated with the United Methodist Church but are not part of the United Methodist Church. And so under this plan, if a church thought they needed to leave the denomination based on the denomination's position, they would have an opportunity to do that by paying their fair share and then creating or joining with an existing denomination. Now, that part of the Traditional Plan could actually be brought into any of the other plans. The disaffiliation process is one that currently there is a process for in our Book of Discipline. What makes it tricky is that our churches have what's called a trust clause. The trust clause says that property owned by a church is actually owned by the denomination, not by the local church. And so, in theory, if a local church wants to leave, they don't get to take their property with them. We have a consultation process where a church can work with their conference in order to figure out, well, what is a fair way for them to get their property. And so, part of the ongoing conversation is if there are churches who want to disaffiliate after the results of General Conference come about, how do we do that in a way that's fair, in a way that isn't going to just leave us using all our resources fighting in court, which has happened to some denominations? One of the things I've most loved about this conversation is that whether people are traditional or progressive, they really want to see the others do ministry and thrive. Nobody wants a court battle over who owns what property. And so we'll see as this moves forward what kind of legislation is included at General Conference that may allow for disaffiliation, if that's necessary. We don't know yet. Now, these are the 3 plans that are presented in the report of the Commission on the Way Forward. There will be more plans that are included with these once all the information comes out about General Conference. And so our General Conference delegates, just a note here to please be praying for them, they will be sifting through these plans plus, who knows, 100 others that can be submitted by people all over the nation on how to help our church to move forward. A few dates that I want to let you know about, and times I'll be giving you some more updates. First of all, in October, what's called the Judicial Council will be meeting. The Judicial Council is our Supreme Court, and they're going to be looking at these plans and looking to see if they line up with our Constitution in places that they're not asking for amendments. So the One Church Plan, the Traditional Church Plan, neither of those include constitutional amendments. Judicial Council will have to determine if that's going to work. Then in November, all of the reports will be made available. Not just the ones from the Commission, but everything that everyone's been submitted. And so at that point, we'll know everything that's on the table. But here's the reality. Until General Conference in February, we're not going to know what's coming, what's going to pass, what's going to happen. And so my hope for you is that you would be taking this time between now and February to pray and to pray and to pray, to ask God to be guiding those who are General Conference delegates, to ask that God would be working through our Methodist Church, that God would be helping us to make disciples. You don't need to go back to your local church and say, we need a plan, because we don't know what we're responding to yet. Once February comes around, here at the James River District Office and throughout the church, we'll be explaining to you what's going on and what needs to happen. But I wanted to let you know now what's in the works, so that you can be praying, so that you can be prepared, and above all, that you can be someone who helps the United Methodist Church to make disciples today, tomorrow, and forevermore. I pray that God is working in you and through you. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact the district office, and I pray that God will continue to make disciples through our church. Thanks, and God bless. Bye-bye.